Anonymous Facebook accounts linked to Russia spread propaganda through Facebook and other social networking sites targeting American voters before Election Day. Those ads were, in some cases, pro-Trump and anti-Clinton. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is starting to come to terms with what happened. He has provided information to Special Counsel Robert Mueller, and he's about to hand over data and ads and information to Congress as well. Here is some of what Zuckerberg said in a Facebook Live video earlier this week.
When someone buys political ads on TV or other media, they're required by law to disclose who paid for them. So we're going to bring Facebook to an even higher standard of transparency.
It's interesting, right? No more anonymity, he says. Zuckerberg says Facebook will make sure you can see who's buying political ads. If a campaign's targeting your mom on Facebook, but not you, you'll still be able to see the ads and find out how people are being influenced. But Senator Mark Warner, the lead Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, wants to make sure this becomes law, not just voluntary by Facebook, but enforceable law. Warner and fellow Democrat Amy Klobuchar are proposing legislation that would force Facebook and Twitter and others to keep public records of political ads. I spoke with Warner earlier in his first interview about the effort. Senator, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brian.
Facebook says it's going to go ahead and voluntarily implement this kind of disclosure. That's what Mark Zuckerberg announced a few days ago. Is that enough voluntary disclosure by Facebook?
Well, listen, I'm glad that Facebook has finally stepped forward. 10 months ago, I started raising this issue. 10 months ago, Facebook was saying, hey, that's crazy. There was no Russian interference. There was no Russian involvement. Well, we've seen now there was dramatic Russian involvement, both in terms of paid advertising as well as these so-called fake accounts, and we still don't know the total number of fake accounts. I don't think we know the full extent of the Russian advertising. I'm glad that Facebook has finally stepped forward. I wish they would have stepped forward much earlier. We will be, the proof of how thorough Facebook will be in the coming weeks. We've not received any of their information yet. They will disclose that to us next week. We want to try to find a way to make some of those ads and other information public, because at the end of the day, this is really about the public's need to know both the source of the content that's coming at them from a political context, and to be assured that if a series of individuals are liking a certain story or liking a certain account, that those individuals are actually who they represent themselves to be, not Russian agents, for example.
But forgive me for being skeptical here. If I set up a Facebook page called Make America Great Again, and I never mentioned Donald Trump in that group, is Facebook going to call that political or not? There's a lot of questions about how to even define political ads.
Ryan, you're exactly right. We recognize the absolute need to protect individuals' privacy. That has got to be one of our tenets. But there's also this requirement, I believe, around disclosure, so that if you're for or against a candidate or for or against a cause, you ought to be able to see the content that's being launched against you, particularly if it comes from a foreign source.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Is disclosure enough? I mean, mere disclosure does not seem to be enough to deter bad actors. Have you thought about going further beyond regulation to restrictions against political advertising on social networking sites?
Listen, social media is transformative. It's over half of America looks at their Facebook account every day. They use it on a regular basis. I would like to start with a light touch. I'd like to start and make, again, this iterative. We probably won't get it 100% right at first.
So Warner wants co-sponsors for this legislation. That's what he's seeking. But what about the bigger issue, the ongoing investigations into the connections between Russia and the Trump campaign? I asked Warner if he has any evidence of coordination.
Listen, I'm not going to draw any final conclusions until we hear from all the witnesses, until we hear all the stories. It is a problem, though, Brian, and I know your and some of the viewers' frustration. It seems like every week there's a new thread to follow or a new revelation coming out. I wish those folks in the administration would be a little more forthcoming, so that if they say there's nothing there, if there's nothing there, they ought to be as forthcoming as possible, and we can move past this. But boy, oh boy, there seems to be an awful lot of unusual, to say the least, connections between people affiliated with Mr. Trump and Russians. And clearly the Russians were trying to influence the campaign and, as we know, had information that was discrediting to Hillary Clinton.
When President Trump says this is a hoax over and over again, he said it every single month since March. What does that do to your investigation?
Well, President Trump's refusal to acknowledge what happened, he's basically rebutting the conclusions of all of his top intelligence agencies. He's rebutting the presumptions and conclusions of all the top officials that he appointed.
Is he obstructing justice, Senator, by saying this every time?
Well, I'll leave that to Bob Mueller and his investigation. What I do know he's doing is he's not making our country safer because we don't have anyone kind of whole of government out of the White House leading the charge to make sure that, our state election systems are fully protected, that how we make sure that we have tighter cybersecurity around our political parties. Someone actually from the White House should have been leading this effort to work with these social media companies to, in effect, be more transparent. The fact that the president hasn't assigned anybody to take on this task and his continual refusal to acknowledge what is accepted as fact by all the intelligence community, I frankly think does our country a great disservice.
And what do you believe the media's role should be here? We've seen coverage of this on a daily basis, but as you said, there's so many threads, it can be overwhelming.
Well, there is a little bit of people get numb to this a bit because it's hard to follow all these names and all these connections. And you've got Mr. Manafort, and you've got, the meetings where the Russians were trying to meet with Mr. Trump Jr. You've got all of these combinations with General Flynn. The fact that the number of people who've had to either be fired or recuse themselves because of connections with Russia and this administration is, again, unprecedented. I think your job, though, is to keep on us, press us, particularly when we've got these kind of new issues like how we bring transparency to social media. We've got to work, frankly, we've got to work through this. There's no previous playbook on how we get this right. How, as you mentioned earlier, you've got a private company. Do you really want that private company doing all of the screening? That's an appropriate question. But on the other hand, if they have access to all of the information, the truth is Facebook and Google and some of these social media companies probably know more about you and me than the United States government knows about you and me. They have this trove of data. And in many ways, we are going to have to work on them because no one else has the same kind of access to information that they have.
Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You can read my full story on this and all of our coverage at reliablesources.com. Up next here, talking more about the Russia probes, hear Carl Bernstein's blunt assessment right after this short break.